Part 1. The announcement. I remember the moment vividly. It was supposed to be just another calm evening at home. Dinner was done, and I was settling down with a beer, looking forward to a peaceful night. But Kayla, my wife, had a different agenda. She came over, a serious look on her face, and said, "Jack, we need to talk." Now, after years together, I could usually tell when something was up. I'd seen this expression before, but nothing prepared me for what she was about to say. She started slowly, with that calculated calm that always put me on edge. "I've been thinking about us, about me," she began. "There's something I need to explore." My stomach tightened. "What do you mean?" I asked, trying to keep my voice even. Then came the words that would shatter our life together. "I want to experience being with someone else. It's not forever, Jack. Just for a while." For me, it hit me like a punch. Part 2. Processing the bombshell. I sat there, beer forgotten, as her words sank in. Kayla went on, explaining as if she'd rehearsed this for weeks. She kept saying things like, "It's just temporary, and it won't change how I feel about you." Her face was all earnest, but I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Just think about it, Jack," she continued, her voice gentle like she was trying to soothe a child. "This is something I need for my own growth. I'll be a better wife, and we'll be stronger because of it." In that moment, I felt like I'd been dropped into some alternate reality where words like love and marriage had lost their meaning. It was almost laughable, except there was nothing funny about it. Kayla was sitting there, calmly explaining her plan to go off and cheat on me, like it was a casual hobby she wanted to try out for a bit. What brought this on?" I managed, fighting to keep my voice steady. "We were fine, weren't we?" She looked away, barely meeting my gaze. "I've been thinking about it for a while," she replied. "And it's not about us. It's about me. I just want to be honest with you, Jack. I didn't want to go behind your back. I thought you'd understand." Understand? Part 3. Her justifications. I sat there, still trying to process the words that had just left her mouth. Everything about this conversation was surreal. This wasn't how couples talk. This wasn't how we talked. Kayla was sitting across from me, trying to explain how she wanted to bring other men into her life, as if this was something we could calmly work through together, like deciding on a new paint color or making a vacation plan. "How can you be so sure this won't change things?" I finally managed to ask. My voice sounded shaky, betraying the emotions boiling beneath the surface. My heart was pounding, each beat louder than the last. I didn't know how to keep steady when the ground beneath me felt like it was giving way. "How could you really think I'd be able to just let you go off and be with other men, and then you just expect to come back, like none of it happened?" She sighed and looked down at her hands, folded on her lap. It was a small, almost rehearsed sigh, like she'd anticipated my reaction and already prepared her response. Her lips pressed together in that careful way she always had when she was gearing up to deliver a complicated argument, like she was about to present a case in court, explaining why her choice was fair and necessary. But this wasn't fair. It was gut-wrenching, and no amount of prepared words would change that. "Because I will come back to you, Jack," she finally said, her tone quiet, like she was trying to comfort me. "No matter what, you'll always be my husband. Nothing about that will change." She softened her voice as if gentleness would somehow make this entire idea sound more reasonable. "But I need this for me. I know it sounds selfish, but sometimes we have to do things for ourselves." Her eyes stayed steady on mine, unwavering, trying to convey sincerity. "This won't take away from what we have. In fact, it'll actually make me a better wife, a better partner to you." I know it sounds crazy, but I believe that. I think that once I go through with this, I'll be a better woman, Jack. The room felt smaller, like the walls were closing in. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. There was a time when she'd been the most understanding, loyal, and devoted person I'd ever known. The woman who laughed with me over burnt dinners, who held me close during hard times. And now she was sitting here, almost casually discussing how going out and finding someone else could somehow make her a better wife. Her words felt absurd, like a twisted logic puzzle that didn't quite add up, no matter how many times I turned it over in my mind. "You really think this is just about you? About what you need?" I said, each word heavier than the last. "What about us, Kayla? What about everything we've been building together? What about our marriage?" Her face softened then, her eyes holding a look of what I could only describe as pity, like I was somehow missing the bigger picture she was seeing. She leaned forward, her hand twitching slightly like she was considering reaching out to touch me but held back. Jack, I know this is hard, she said, her voice almost a whisper now, as if speaking softly would soften the weight of what she was asking. But think about it. You love me, don't you? The question hit me like a slap, and she watched me closely, her gaze unwavering. If you really love me, she went on, you'll let me do this. You'll understand that it's not about wanting to be with other people. It's about finding a way to feel more whole, to be the best version of myself, so I can give you the best version of myself in return. Her eyes searched mine, looking for any sign of agreement, some indication that I understood this bizarre logic she was trying to sell me. It's for us, Jack. I promise you'll see. This will work. I need you to trust me on this. The way she said it, it sounded like she genuinely believed it, as if she had managed to convince herself this was all reasonable. The fact that she thought she could just ask this of me, that she tried to twist it around to somehow seem like it was for my benefit, was like a gut punch. It hurt to see her this way, spinning a fantasy in which breaking our commitment would somehow bring us closer. But all I could feel was disbelief. Part 5. My world crumbling, I sat there in silence, the weight of her words pressing down on me, feeling as if each moment stretched into an eternity. There was a surreal quality to it, like I was watching this happen from outside myself. Kayla sat across from me, hands folded in her lap, her expression almost serene, as though she had come to some profound realization that she expected me to share. But all I felt was a strange emptiness growing inside me, a hollow ache that spread as I realized just how sure she was of this decision. So, you're asking me to sit here and watch you walk out the door, I said, the words heavy, like they'd taken every ounce of strength to say. You want me to be okay with that? To let you go off and do whatever you need to do, with whoever you choose, and then you'll come back, and we're supposed to pretend it's fine? I felt my voice crack, betraying my anger, my hurt. But she didn't flinch. Instead, Kayla nodded slowly, her expression unwavering. Yes, Jack, she said, as though she were stating something obvious. That's exactly what I'm asking. I know it sounds crazy, and I know it's not what you want to hear. But I've thought this through, and I truly believe that this is what we need. What I need. Her voice softened, and she gave a faint, almost apologetic smile. When I come back, I know we'll be better for it. I shook my head, a bitter laugh escaping me as I tried to make sense of her logic. Do you even hear yourself, Kayla? I asked, the words coming out sharper than I intended. You're talking about leaving me, about going out and finding someone else to be with. That's not a break or growth. That's betrayal. And when you come back, am I supposed to pretend none of it happened? Just sweep it under the rug? She reached out, her hand brushing mine gently, and it only made things worse. It felt like a mockery, a small, meaningless gesture in the face of what she was doing. Jack, she said softly, it's not betrayal. I'll be here, always. This isn't about running away from you. I'll come back. It's not about leaving you at all. It's about exploring a part of myself that I've ignored for too long. The room felt like it was shrinking, the walls pressing in, suffocating me. How could she stand there and look at me with those eyes, so calm and certain, while asking me to sacrifice everything I'd believed in, everything we'd built together? A silence settled between us, thick and uncomfortable, and I could feel the distance growing wider with each word she said. She wasn't asking for my permission. She was expecting my acceptance. How long have you been thinking about this? I asked, my voice barely more than a whisper. The hurt was thick in my throat, but I forced myself to look her in the eye. I needed to know how long she had been planning this. How many nights had she laid beside me, our lives carrying on as usual, while this idea was growing in her mind? She hesitated for the first time, her gaze shifting slightly. A while, she admitted, her tone cautious. I didn't want to hurt you, Jack. I've been trying to find the right time to bring it up. I thought that if I was honest with you now, before it got more serious, you'd understand. Honest? The word stung. She was calling this honesty, as if bringing me into her plans after she'd already decided to go through with them was some kind of virtue. She wasn't being honest. She was presenting me with a finished plan, a plan I had no say in. She didn't want my opinion. She wanted my consent. I don't know if I can accept this, Kayla, I said finally, my voice quiet but unyielding. The anger simmered beneath my words, and I could feel the tension, the sense of betrayal, mounting with each breath. You're asking me to go against everything we've promised each other. And I just don't know if I can do that. I don't know if I can let you do this. Let you tear apart everything I thought was real. She sat back, her expression thoughtful, as if my reaction was some unexpected challenge she needed to navigate. But then, almost as if deciding on a different approach, her face softened, and she sighed. Her tone was calm, almost patient, as if she were the one making the sacrifice here. "I understand, Jack," she said quietly. "I knew this wouldn't be easy for you to hear. But I need you to understand, too. This is something I have to do. For me." She gave me a searching look, waiting for me to come around, waiting for that moment of surrender. But all I could feel was the growing, insistent ache in my chest, the realization that the woman I loved, the woman I thought I knew, was slipping away. There was a distance between us now, something vast and painful, and I couldn't see a way to bridge it. Everything I thought we had, the future we'd planned, felt like it was dissolving right before my eyes. "Is this really worth it to you?" I finally asked, feeling the weight of each word as it fell. "Is whatever you think you're going to find out there worth tearing down what we've built together?" Her gaze held steady, and for the first time, I saw a glimmer of hesitation, a flicker of uncertainty. But it was gone just as quickly, replaced with that same, stubborn resolve. "Yes, Jack," she said, her voice soft but unwavering. "It is. I believe it is." And that was it, the answer that cut deeper than any explanation, any promise. In that moment, I understood that nothing I could say would change her mind. She had already left in every way that mattered, long before this conversation. And the hardest part was realizing that no amount of love, no promise, could bring her back to me. The future I'd imagined felt distant now, replaced by this unbearable, heavy silence. All I had left was a sinking feeling that nothing would ever be the same again. Part 6. The collapse. I searched her face, looking for some sign of the woman I had fallen in love with, hoping to see even a glimmer of regret or hesitation. But Kayla's expression remained steady, her eyes unwavering. She truly believed that this was right, that she could tear apart the fabric of our life and somehow stitch it back together when she was done. "What if I say no?" I asked, the words barely audible. "What if I tell you that I can't accept this, that it's too much for me?" She looked away then, for the first time avoiding my gaze, her hands fidgeting in her lap. "I don't want to give you an ultimatum, Jack," she said softly, her voice almost trembling. "But this is something I have to do. I've tried to push it aside, tried to ignore it, but it's there, and it's not going away." Her gaze returned to me, resolute and intense. "I would rather do this with your blessing, knowing you support me, than do it behind your back." The weight of her words pressed down on me, each one a blow that left me feeling smaller, more powerless. It wasn't a request, it was a statement. She was going through with this, no matter what I said. I could either stand by and watch or walk away, but nothing would change her course. "So that's it, then?" I asked, my voice growing cold. "You're willing to throw everything away, to risk everything. For, what? A few months? A little excitement?" She shook her head, her expression sad but determined. "It's not about excitement, Jack. It's about figuring out who I am. I've been with you my whole adult life. I love you, but I need to know that this is really what I want. And to know that, I have to experience life outside of us, outside of this marriage." Her words felt like a slap, and I struggled to keep my composure. "We built a life together, Kayla. We built something real. And you're telling me that it's not enough? That I'm not enough?" "It's not that you're not enough, Jack," she said, her voice soft, almost pleading. "This isn't about you. It's about me. It's about making sure that when I come back, I'm whole, that I'm really the woman you deserve." She reached for my hand, but I pulled away, unable to bear the touch of her hand on mine. She looked hurt, but it didn't stop her. Nothing would. "I need you to understand," she continued, her voice breaking slightly. "I don't want to hurt you, Jack. I really don't. But I can't keep ignoring this feeling. If I don't do this, I'll resent it one day. And I don't want that to happen." I stared at her, my mind racing, trying to process the twisted logic of her words. She was willing to hurt me, willing to risk our entire future, for the chance to find herself. It felt selfish, self-centered in a way I had never imagined her to be. The woman I thought I knew was slipping away, replaced by someone who seemed foreign, almost unrecognizable. "And what happens when you're done?" I asked, the bitterness creeping into my voice. "What happens after you've had your experience? Do we just pick up where we left off? Do I just welcome you back like nothing happened?" She hesitated, her face faltering for a moment before she nodded. "Yes, Jack. That's exactly it. I know it sounds impossible right now, but when this is over, we'll have a fresh start. We'll be stronger, and I'll be more committed than ever. The audacity of her words left me speechless. She truly believed that she could walk away, live her life with other men, and then return to me as if nothing had changed. But the truth was, everything had already changed. The moment she spoke those words, the foundation of our marriage began to crumble, and I didn't know if anything could hold it together. A bitter laugh escaped me before I could stop it. You really believe that, don't you? You think you can just take a break, run off to find yourself, and come back as if nothing's happened. I shook my head, the disbelief and anger rising in me. That's not love, Kayla. That's betrayal. She looked at me, her expression pained, but she didn't back down. I know it's hard to understand, Jack, but I'm doing this for us too. For our future. The words stung, as though she were twisting the knife, telling me that the pain I felt was somehow a gift, a sacrifice I should willingly make for the sake of us. But there was no us in this decision, only her and what she wanted, what she needed. And for the first time, I wondered if I'd ever really known her at all. Finally, I stood up, unable to sit still any longer, the weight of the conversation crushing me. I don't know if I can do this, Kayla, I said, my voice barely a whisper. I don't know if I can stand by and watch you destroy everything we've built. She looked up at me, her eyes filled with a mixture of determination and sorrow. I hope you'll try to understand, Jack. I don't want this to be the end. I love you, and I'll come back to you when it's over. I promise. Her words hung in the air, but they felt empty, like a hollow echo of the woman I thought I knew. The weight of her decision was heavy, pressing down on both of us, filling the room with a silence that felt endless and suffocating. I left the room, unable to look at her any longer. I needed air, space, anything to escape the crushing reality that everything I thought I knew had changed in an instant. I felt as though I'd been cast adrift, and for the first time in our life together, I wasn't sure if we'd ever find our way back. Part 7. The aftermath. I went out to the backyard, the cool night air hitting me like a shock, but it did little to numb the storm raging inside. I stood there, staring up at the stars, feeling the vastness of the night stretch out before me, empty and indifferent. How had we come to this? Just hours ago, everything had felt normal, stable. Now it felt like my whole life had been tilted on its axis, and there was no way to stop the spin. In the silence of the yard, the weight of her words crashed over me, each one carving deeper into the trust we'd built. She'd said she loved me, that she was doing this for us. But no matter how I turned it over in my mind, I couldn't see it that way. Love wasn't supposed to feel like this. Love wasn't supposed to leave you questioning everything you believed, everything you'd built together. I leaned back against the cold metal of the patio chair, trying to steady myself, but nothing could quiet the whirlwind of thoughts churning inside. Memories surfaced unbidden. The day we met, the first time we said, I love you. The day we exchanged vows. I'd stood there in that suit, promising to be hers forever, promising to love and protect her, to give her everything. And I'd meant every word. But what good were those promises now? How could they stand against this emptiness that had taken root between us? The door creaked open behind me, and I felt her presence before I saw her. She stepped out into the night, her movements hesitant, as if she knew that the slightest sound might shatter the fragile silence between us. I didn't turn to look at her. I couldn't. The sight of her would only remind me of the conversation that had torn everything apart. Jack, she said softly, her voice carrying across the distance between us, heavy with uncertainty. I don't want things to end like this. I closed my eyes, exhaling slowly, fighting the urge to let my anger spill out. I wanted to yell, to demand answers, to ask her how she could be so calm, so resolute, while I felt like I was crumbling. But I didn't have the energy for that. Not now. I just felt tired. Then why? I asked, my voice barely more than a whisper. If you don't want things to end like this, why are you doing this to us? She stepped closer, her footsteps quiet on the grass, and I felt her sit down on the edge of the chair beside me. I know it's hard for you to understand, she said, her tone pleading, but this is something I need, Jack. It's something that's been building inside me for a long time. I didn't plan it this way. I didn't want to hurt you. But I can't ignore it anymore. I have to see this through. I shook my head, still unable to meet her gaze. So that's it, then? You're willing to tear down everything we have, Everything we've built, just to find yourself? The words felt bitter, like poison on my tongue, but I couldn't hold them back. I had to know if she even understood the damage she was causing. She sighed, her hands clasped together tightly, her knuckles pale in the moonlight. I'm not trying to tear anything down, Jack. I know it feels that way, but that's not my intention. I truly believe that when this is over, I'll come back to you as a better, stronger person. And then we'll move forward together, like we planned. A bitter laugh escaped me, unbidden. Move forward? You think we can just move forward after this? I shook my head, finally turning to look at her, the disbelief and hurt evident in my eyes. You're leaving, Kayla. You're leaving to be with other men. How can you possibly think we can just pick up where we left off? She looked down, her expression flickering with a hint of vulnerability. I understand that it's hard to see now, Jack, but I believe that when I come back, things will be different. Stronger. We'll have a fresh start. A fresh start? I echoed, unable to keep the bitterness from my voice. You can't just hit reset on our marriage. That's not how this works. You're walking away, and you expect me to just stand by and wait for you? To watch as you go off and live some other life? Kayla looked at me, her eyes filled with a mixture of determination and sorrow. I know it's hard, but I believe it's the only way. I need you to trust me, Jack. I need you to trust that I'll come back. The words settled between us, heavy and cold. She was asking for a trust one couldn't give. I couldn't bring myself to believe that this was something we could recover from, something we could just sweep under the rug. How could she expect that of me? I looked away, the ache in my chest growing. I don't think I can do that, Kayla. I don't think I can wait here, pretending everything's fine, while you go off and leave me behind. That's not fair. Not to me. Not to us. She reached out, her hand brushing against my arm, but I pulled away, the contact too painful to bear. She seemed to withdraw, her hand falling back into her lap, her face a mixture of hurt and resignation. I don't want to lose you, Jack, she said, her voice barely more than a whisper. The irony stung, cutting deeper than anything else. She was saying she didn't want to lose me while asking for the very thing that would tear us apart. And the most painful part? She didn't even see it. She thought this was a solution, a temporary adventure that would somehow leave us stronger. But I couldn't see it that way. I couldn't see how we'd ever come back from this. It felt like something fundamental had been broken between us, something that couldn't be repaired with promises or reassurances. I stood up, feeling the weight of her gaze on me as I stepped away. I don't know what to say to you, Kayla, I said, my voice thick with emotion. I don't know if there's anything left to say. She watched me, her face shadowed in the dim light, and I could see the glimmer of tears in her eyes. Please, Jack, just think about it. Think about what I've said. I'll give you time, as much as you need. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak, and turned away, leaving her sitting there in the quiet of the night. The darkness wrapped around me as I walked back into the house, each step feeling heavier than the last. I knew that when I turned around, she'd still be sitting there, holding onto her plans, her dreams, while I was left with the shattered pieces of what we'd once shared. For the first time, I realized that our love, the life we'd built together, was slipping through my fingers. And as much as I wanted to hold on, to keep her close, I could feel the distance widening between us, an empty chasm that I didn't know if we could ever cross. As I closed the door, I stood there in the silence, feeling the weight of back. I can't do this, Kayla, I said, my voice barely more than a whisper. I can't be here, watching you walk out of our life for something I don't even understand. Her eyes filled with sadness, but she didn't try to stop me. She just nodded, as though she'd expected this all along. I understand, Jack. Take as much time as you need. I didn't respond. I couldn't. I grabbed my jacket, my keys, and walked out of the house, the door closing behind me with a heavy, final sound. The morning was cold, the sky overcast, and as I got in the car, I realized I had no idea where I was going. I just knew I had to leave, to get away from the place that had once been my sanctuary, the home we built together that now felt like a stranger's house. I drove aimlessly, the landscape passing by in a blur, as I tried to make sense of the wreckage that was now my life. The memories came unbidden, each one a painful reminder of the love we'd shared, the dreams we'd had, and the future that now seemed shattered beyond repair. I thought about the nights we'd stayed up late, talking about our plans, laughing at our inside jokes, building a life that, until now, had felt unbreakable. But it wasn't unbreakable. It was fragile, vulnerable, and all it had taken was a single decision, a single choice on her part, to destroy it. I finally pulled over at a small park on the edge of town, a place we'd gone to a few times over the years, back when everything had felt certain and safe. I sat on a bench overlooking the water, the cold seeping into my bones as I tried to process the reality I now faced. She was leaving. Maybe not forever, but in a way that felt just as final. And when she came back, if she came back, things would never be the same. The realization hit me, sharp and painful. There was no coming back from this. Even if she returned, even if she decided that she'd found whatever it was she was looking for, I didn't know if I could be there waiting. I didn't know if I could ever look at her the same way, knowing that she had been willing to walk away from everything we had. I sat there for hours, the days slipping by unnoticed, the world moving on around me. And by the time the sun started to dip below the horizon, I knew what I had to do. I couldn't wait for her, couldn't put my life on hold, hoping that she would somehow come back to me whole and unchanged. She had made her choice, and now it was time for me to make mine. With a heavy heart, I stood up, knowing that this was the beginning of a painful journey I hadn't asked for, but now had no choice but to take. Part 9. A new kind of loneliness as the sun set. I made my way back to the house, feeling a weight settle over me with each step. It was as if I were saying goodbye to every memory we'd built there. The laughter, the quiet moments, even the arguments that seemed so small now. I'd never felt so alienated from my own life. What had once felt like my home was now just a shell, a place that housed memories but no longer felt like it held my future. When I opened the door, I half expected to see her waiting for me, maybe with a look of regret, maybe even with the intention to take back everything she'd said. But the living room was empty, the house silent, her absence louder than any words she could have spoken. The ache in my chest tightened as I walked past the framed photos on the wall. Pictures from vacations, birthdays, all those days when things had seemed solid and real. How could she walk away from this? How could she look at our life, at everything we'd built, and see it as something she could put on hold while she went off to find herself? I sat down on the couch, numb, staring at the spot where she'd been sitting last night when she told me her plan. In the dim light, the room seemed different, colder, as though it no longer held the warmth we'd shared. I let out a long breath, the silence pressing in on me, amplifying the hollow feeling inside. Time passed, though I hardly noticed. The house grew darker as the evening settled in fully, but I let emptiness settle around me, knowing that no matter what I chose, nothing would ever be the same again. Part 8. The beginning of the end. The next morning was quiet, filled with a tension so thick it felt like the house itself was holding its breath. I hadn't slept. Instead, I spent the night in a fog of disbelief and anger, replaying Kayla's words over and over. By the time the sun rose, I was exhausted and numb, caught between the urge to confront her again and the fear of what more she might say. When I finally dragged myself out of bed, I found her in the kitchen, pouring coffee. She looked up at me with a tentative smile, like she was hoping things might somehow feel normal again. But there was no normal anymore, no easy morning routine or comfortable silence between us. There was only the chasm, yawning wider and wider with every passing second. "Good morning," she said softly, her tone cautious. I didn't answer. I couldn't. Instead, I just took a mug, poured myself coffee, and sat down at the table, avoiding her gaze. The silence stretched out, brittle and uneasy, until she finally spoke again. "Jack, I know yesterday was hard," she started, her voice barely above a whisper. "And I understand if you're still upset, but I just want to remind you that I love you. I need you to know that." A bitter laugh escaped me before I could stop it, and I looked up at her, unable to hold back the frustration that had been simmering all night. "You keep saying that, Kayla. You keep saying you love me, that you don't want to hurt me. But look at what you're asking me to accept. How can you stand there and say you love me when you're willing to put me through this?" She flinched, her face tightening as she set her mug down. "Jack, it's because I love you that I want to be honest with you. I don't want to go behind your back. I want to give us both the chance to get through this together. But you're not giving me a chance, Kayla." I shot back, the words spilling out, hot and furious. "You're giving me an ultimatum. You're saying, I'm doing this whether you like it or not, and if you love me, you'll be here waiting when I'm done. How is that fair? How is that supposed to make me feel anything but betrayed?" Her shoulders slumped, her gaze dropping to the floor. I don't expect you to understand right away, she said quietly, but I hope that, in time, you'll see why I have to do this. I shook my head, feeling the raw edge of desperation. What is it, Kayla? What are you looking for out there that you can't find here with me? She looked up then, and there was a flicker of something in her eyes, something I couldn't quite place. Regret, maybe, or doubt, but it was gone as quickly as it had appeared, replaced by that same, determined look she'd worn the night before. It's not about you, Jack, she said, her voice steady. It's about me. I need to know who I am outside of us. I need to find a part of myself that I feel like I've lost. Her words stung, but I couldn't tell if it was because of the sentiment or because I realized deep down that there was nothing I could say to stop her. She had made up her mind, and nothing I said would change that. She was going to go through with this, no matter what it cost us. I looked at her, feeling the last remnants of hope fade, leaving only a hollow ache in its place. So that's it, then? You're really going to walk away? You're willing to risk everything for this? This part of yourself you need to find? She held my gaze, her expression resolute. Yes, Jack, I am. I know it's hard to understand, but I have to do this. The finality of her words hit me like a punch to the gut, and I felt the strength leave me, like I was deflating, collapsing under the weight of what was happening. She was serious. This wasn't a phase or a whim or some misguided attempt to bring excitement into our lives. She had made up her mind, and she was going to walk away, leaving me to pick up the pieces. Without another word, I stood up, my legs shaky as I pushed the chair didn't bother to turn on any lights. There was a strange comfort in the darkness, as though it mirrored the emptiness I felt. It was only when I heard the sound of the front door opening that I stirred, and my heart twisted when I saw Kayla standing there. She looked hesitant, almost vulnerable, her eyes scanning the room before they settled on me. She closed the door softly, setting her purse down, and then she came and sat across from me, just as she had the night before. But this time, there was no calmness in her expression, no certainty. Her face looked drawn, her eyes tired, and for a fleeting moment, I thought she might have changed her mind. Jack, she began, her voice barely a whisper, thick with something I couldn't quite place. I know this has been hard. I didn't expect it to be this difficult. I looked at her, my gaze steady, but my heart was racing. Then why do it, Kayla? Why put us through this if you're not even sure it's what you want? She swallowed, looking down at her hands. It's not that I don't want it, she said softly, almost apologetically. It's just, I didn't think it would hurt this much. I didn't think it would be so hard to see you like this, to see the pain in your eyes. Then don't do it, I said, the desperation creeping into my voice despite my efforts to keep it in check. Stay, Kayla. We can work through whatever it is you're feeling. We don't have to break everything apart just because you're looking for something. We can find it together. She looked at me then, and for a brief moment, I thought I saw a flicker of hesitation, a moment of doubt. But just as quickly, that look faded, replaced by that same steely resolve that had shattered my world the night before. It's not that simple, Jack, she said quietly, shaking her head. This isn't something I can ignore. If I stay, if I pretend this feeling doesn't exist, I'll only grow more distant. I can't live like that, and I can't ask you to live like that either. Her words settled between us, the finality of them sinking in, making it clear that this was the end of the conversation, of my pleas, of any hope I might have had left. She was going to leave, and there was nothing I could say or do to stop her. I could only accept it. So, when do you go? I asked, my voice hollow, each word feeling like a stone I had to force out. She hesitated, glancing away. I'll leave tomorrow, she said softly. I'll stay with a friend for a while, get my bearings, and then, I don't know, I'll figure it out from there. Tomorrow. I felt the final thread unravel, the last shred of hope slipping through my fingers. She wasn't just leaving our life. She was leaving it quickly, as if she couldn't stand to linger in the ruins of what we once were. I nodded, unable to trust my voice, and looked away, staring out the window at the darkness beyond. We sat there in silence, a vast, impenetrable wall between us. For years, we'd been partners, lovers, best friends, and now we were little more than strangers, each on the opposite side of a chasm we couldn't bridge. I wanted to say something, anything, to make her stay, to make her remember the life we'd built. But there were no words left. She'd made her choice, and I was powerless to change it. Eventually, she stood, her movements slow and careful, as though she didn't want to disturb the silence. "I'll sleep in the guest room tonight," she murmured, almost to herself, and without another word, she walked down the hall, leaving me alone in the dim light of the living room. I didn't move for a long time, letting the emptiness settle around me. The house felt different now, each room haunted by memories of her laugh, and as I sat there, alone and hollow, I realized that she was already gone, even though she hadn't left yet. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the faint sounds of her moving around in the guest room. Each creak of the floor, each soft sigh was a reminder of the distance between us, of the life we'd shared and the one she was choosing to leave behind. And in those long, sleepless hours, I felt the first stirring of something I hadn't expected: anger. She'd made her choice, and now I had to make mine. I wouldn't beg her to stay. I wouldn't wait for her to return, hoping that she'd somehow come back to me as the woman I'd fallen in love with. I couldn't live like that. I deserved more than that. When I finally got up, I went through the motions, making coffee, showering, moving with a numbness that felt both foreign and familiar. I didn't know what the future held, didn't know if I'd ever be able to forgive her or myself for what had happened. But I knew one thing: I couldn't keep waiting for someone who had already left. Part 10. The final goodbye. As I sat in the kitchen nursing my coffee, I heard her soft footsteps approach. Kayla stepped into the room, her face pale and drawn, her eyes carrying the same tired look as mine. She hovered by the doorway, hesitant, as if she wasn't sure she was welcome anymore. And maybe she wasn't. She glanced at her packed bags by the door, then back at me. "I just wanted to say goodbye," she murmured, her voice barely more than a whisper. "I don't know how long I'll be gone, but I wanted to thank you for understanding." Her words felt hollow, like an echo of the promises we'd once made, stripped of all meaning. I looked at her, feeling an ache settle in my chest. It was the strangest sensation, a mix of sorrow, bitterness, and, despite it all, the faintest trace of love for the woman I'd shared so much of my life with. But that love felt distant now, like a memory I was slowly losing my grip on. I forced myself to speak, keeping my voice even. "I don't know if I understand, Kayla. I don't know if I ever will. But if this is what you need to do, I can't stop you. I won't." She blinked, her eyes glistening, and for a moment, I thought I saw a flash of regret. But she quickly looked away, her shoulders stiffening, her resolve hardening. "I don't expect you to understand, Jack, but I need you to believe that I'm doing this for us, for the future I hope we can still have." I nodded, though the words barely registered. A part of me had stopped listening, as if my mind were already shutting down, shielding itself from the pain of watching her walk out of our life. She lingered, looking at me with an expression that seemed almost like longing, but she didn't move closer. I'll check in, let you know how I'm doing," she said, as though that would somehow make it easier. "Maybe in a few months, we can talk, see where things stand." "Maybe," I replied, though I didn't believe it. I knew that, after this, everything would be different. I wasn't sure if there would be anything left to talk about when she returned, if she even did. The silence stretched between us, heavy and uncomfortable. I thought about everything I wanted to say, all the words I hadn't said last night, the things I'd held back in a futile hope that maybe she would change her mind. But now, standing here, I realized that none of it mattered anymore. She'd made her decision, and nothing I could say would change that. Finally, she picked up her bags, her movements slow and deliberate, as though each one took a toll. She looked back at me, her face softening for just a moment. "Goodbye, Jack," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "Goodbye, Kayla," I replied, my own voice steady, though my heart felt like it was splintering with each passing second. And then she turned, walked to the door, and left. The house was deathly quiet after she closed the door behind her. I stood there, staring at the empty space she'd left, feeling a cold emptiness settle over me. The finality of it sank in, pressing down with a weight that felt almost unbearable. I had known this moment was coming, but nothing could have prepared me for how deeply it hurt. I sank into a chair. The silence was oppressive, filling every corner of the house, every space where her laughter, her voice, her presence had once been. I could still see her everywhere: the coffee mug she always used, the book she'd left open on the table, the throw blanket she always draped over the couch. Each one was a reminder of a life we'd shared, a life that was now in pieces. It felt like the end of something sacred, something that had once been unbreakable. And as I sat there, alone, I began to understand that the woman I'd loved was gone. She'd left long before she walked out that door, and now I was left with the shattered pieces of what we had once been. I don't know how long I sat there, numb and adrift, as the morning passed and the house grew brighter with the late morning light. Hours drifted by without meaning, the day moving. Finally, I stood up, my body aching from the stillness, and moved through the house, collecting the pieces of her life that remained. I picked up the book she'd left, the coffee mug, the clothes she'd forgotten to pack, feeling the ache in my chest grow heavier with each small item. And then I put them all in a box, tucking it away in a closet, as though hiding the evidence might make it hurt less. But even as I tried to erase her presence from the house, the memories lingered, clinging to every corner, every shadow, refusing to be swept away. Part 11. Picking up the pieces. The next few days passed in a haze, each one blurring into the next. I went through the motions, work, errands, conversations with friends and family, but nothing felt real. Friends reached out, sensing something was wrong, but I couldn't bring myself to talk about it. I wasn't ready to share what had happened, wasn't ready to hear the inevitable questions and the sympathy in their voices. So I kept it to myself, retreating further into the solitude of our home, where the silence weighed heavily but at least felt familiar. Each night, I lay awake, staring at the empty space beside me, feeling the absence of her warmth, her presence. I'd reach out instinctively, only to be met with the cool emptiness of the sheets, a reminder that she was gone. And each time, the pain felt fresh, like a wound that refused to heal. But as the days passed, something strange began to happen. The hurt was still there, raw and aching, but it began to dull, fading from a sharp, unbearable pain to a quiet, lingering ache. I still missed her. One evening, as I stood by the kitchen sink, washing a few dishes, I caught sight of her favorite mug, the one I'd boxed up but had somehow left behind. It was a small, seemingly insignificant item, but as I looked at it, I felt a strange sense of release. I didn't need it anymore. I didn't need to hold on to those small, painful reminders. Kayla had left, and she wasn't coming back. It was time to start letting go. So, I took the mug, the last of her things, and packed it away with the rest. I sealed the box, carried it out to the garage, and set it in the corner, ready to be taken to storage. It was a small gesture, but it felt like a step forward, a way to reclaim my space, to start rebuilding my life. In the quiet of that night, standing in the dim garage, I realized that I was no longer waiting for her return. She had made her choice, and now I was making mine. I was free to let go, to rebuild, and finally, to live again.